All right, well, I want to thank everyone for coming. This is the last installment in our series on the false religions, and we're going to be talking about two tonight. First, we'll talk about Islam, and then we'll talk about Sikhism. So, in your notes, it should be two-sided, or there's two pages, one for each of the religions. All right, so let's start with prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you, Lord, for this opportunity for all of us to come together this evening and to just seek greater understanding of those in the world, Lord, who have been led into belief systems that are different than our own. And help us to have discernment, help us to have understanding and compassion, help this information to be something that ultimately edifies us, but also prepares us to be able to be witnesses throughout the world, whenever we may encounter somebody of a different faith system. And so, Lord, I ask that you just prepare our hearts and our minds for the insights that you have for us this evening, that you help us to hear truth where there is truth, but then also to see where things have been distorted and where there is falseness. Lord, help us to be able to recognize that and then be able to adapt that, to be able to speak truth to those around us. And so, Lord, I want to speak against anything that is here that is just not of you. I want it all to be bound and just allow your truth, your presence, your clarity to be what guides us this evening. And so we dedicate all of this to you, and it's in Christ's name I pray. Amen. Okay, so the first QR code was digital notes, a PDF of the notes. The second QR code is a link to a YouTube playlist. This is being recorded and it will be uploaded sometime this week. But if you've missed any of the other workshops, all of them are available on there. And each one also has a PDF of notes that's in the description. So you can then watch the teaching on the other faiths that we've covered so far in this series, and also download all the notes if you happen to have missed any of them. All right, so tonight we're going to be talking about two religions, and like I said, it's the last two we're going to be covering in this series. And the first one is Islam. Okay, so that's where we're going to start, is with Islam. So Islam was founded by Muhammad, who is deemed by Muslims as the final seal of many prophets, okay? And he's the final prophet from a long line of prophets. So they believe all the prophets of the Old Testament were in fact prophets. They also look at Jesus, and they believe Jesus was a prophet, as well as others. I think there's, according to them, a total like over 100,000, 120-something thousand prophets. But Muhammad is the final one, and that is who they revere. They do not worship Muhammad. They revere him, but they do not worship him because they see him as the final prophet, the final seal from Allah, which is their name for their God, is Allah. So that's what I'll be using tonight. So Muhammad was born in 570 AD, okay? So 570 AD, so about almost 600 years after Christ. And he was born in the Arabian Peninsula. All right, so the Arabian Peninsula, now at the time, it consisted of hundreds of tribes and clans. There were very few cities. There really weren't established countries. It's not quite like what we think of today, right? Instead, it was a lot more nomadic and a lot more spread out. And most of the people there lived in tribes and clans that they were born into. So most of them had kind of a relatedness to their tribe and clan. And it wasn't like it is today, where there's cities and people move around and, make independent choices. Instead, it was quite tribal at that time. Now, what's interesting about Muhammad is one of the few cities that did exist was Mecca. And Mecca continues to be the most important city to the Muslim faith. He was born in Mecca, and he was born into the ruling tribe, the ruling clan of the city of that day. But his father died before he was born, and his mother was very poor. So very soon after his birth, she actually gave him to a nomadic tribe, a Bedouin tribe. And he spent the first 4 years of his life in a nomadic lifestyle around the Arabian Peninsula. Then he was returned to his mother. So at the age of 5, he was reunited with his mother, and she decided to move them toward where she had family. But along the way, she died. And they had stopped at an oasis. The caravan they were traveling with left them there and continued on. And they were hoping to be picked up by the next caravan who might come through. But in the meantime, she died and left him an orphan. So at 6 years old, he's now an orphan, gets picked up by another caravan, gets taken back to Mecca, where he spends 2 years with his grandfather until his grandfather then dies. And then he goes into the care of his uncle. So by the time he's 8 years old, he didn't know his father. His father died before he was born. He didn't know his mother for the first 4 years of his life. He lived nomadically. He only had a short time with her, and then she died. And then he goes and lives with his grandfather for a short time, and he dies. So these are very, foundational experiences to who he is, right? And to his way of thinking, his way of interpreting things. So I always like to point that out, because whenever we're talking about somebody who goes on to establish a religion, those early life experiences, familial experiences do show up in there. It does affect, how they perceive things and their understanding of things. So the uncle he goes to live with ends up being one of the elites of that tribe, and a very well-established, wealthy, successful trader. So he ends up spending the next 15 to 20 years of his life working for his uncle as a trader. So he still was very nomadic, would travel, got to interact with people around the Arabian Peninsula, potentially beyond, because there's a big trading route there. So that's going to be relevant, because what's just north of the Arabian Peninsula is Jerusalem. And we're talking about, right, that's when we have Jewish people, but we also now have Christians in that area too. So while there weren't a lot of Jews and Christians living in the peninsula, there was a lot of trade that was happening, especially in the northern part, right? So he did have interactions and exposure to. We just don't know how much exposure to Jews and Christians and people from, other parts of the world. But that's relevant later to the story. Okay. They say, according to tradition, that he developed a reputation for being fair, for being honest. And what happens is, around the age of 21, let me back up. Okay. So at the time of his birth, let me finish talking about Mecca too, so you can go ahead to the next slide. So what was also relevant about Mecca is that they had this structure called the Kaaba. Okay, and the Kaaba is in Mecca. It's still in Mecca today. When Muslims face Mecca to pray, they're really facing the Kaaba. Okay, so if you've ever heard of the 5 pillars of Islam, one of them is to pray 5 times a day facing Mecca. They're actually facing the Kaaba. And also, when they're supposed to take at least one pilgrimage in their lifetime to Mecca, it's not really to Mecca, it's to the Kaaba. That's what they go to. And this was in existence at the time, and in fact, before that. And at the time of his childhood, it was a place of polytheistic worship, because it was a place that people would come and they'd put their different gods up, they'd put figures and things, and it was like a holy site. Well, the ruling clan of the city, it was a big tourist destination, right? There weren't that many cities, but this was a place that people would pilgrimage to. So it was a big part of their economy. And that's also relevant to the story. But what's interesting is, they call God Allah, and that's a big part of Muhammad's message, right, is against the polytheistic worship of the day, and that there really is only one God, and his name is Allah. Well, before Muhammad had that revelation, at the time that this area and the Kaaba was polytheistic, or a place for polytheistic worship, Allah was the name of the high God. So it wasn't that the people of that day didn't know who Allah was. They just saw Allah as kind of the top God, and then all the other ones that they might worship, kind of went under him. So when Muhammad comes with his message is all these other ones aren't real. They're not true. You shouldn't be worshiping anything other than Allah. So Allah originally was a term that referred to their high God, their top God, the one that was the creator, the one that was at the top of their hierarchy. Now, about the Kaaba, what's also interesting, Orthodox Muslims, now, let me say this. So some of what I'll be sharing is information we know from the Quran, but also some of it is from tradition, especially oral tradition, and then some of it is from actual historians. So it's kind of a blend of sources, but whenever I say tradition, just take it with a grain of salt, because it's oral tradition from people who believe and revere this information. So we don't know how much of it has been kind of cleaned up, you know what I'm saying? And there's truth, it's been validated to a degree, but it's also going to be, presented in a way that is preferable to them. So one of the things that we can't verify, but Orthodox Muslims claim, is that the Kaaba was actually built by Adam, as in Adam and Eve. So they believe Eden was near here, and that Adam, when they were banished from Eden, built this. And that it eroded over time, and so then it was rebuilt by Abraham and his son Ishmael. So if you remember the story of Abraham, right? God said that he would give him and Sarah a son, and they grew impatient, and they didn't think that it would happen because years kept passing, and they were getting older and older. And so Sarah had the bright idea to bring her maidservant, her handmaiden, and say, here, maybe this is what we should do. You should have a child with her. Well, that child was Ishmael. Okay? But then after Ishmael's born, Sarah starts to feel jealous of that and threatened by that. Well, then also she gets pregnant with Isaac. So then now we have a debate, because Ishmael's technically the oldest, but it wasn't with Sarah. And then now we have Isaac, so who does the promise go to? God's promise went to Isaac, because it was supposed to be a child he had with Sarah. So that they end up banishing Ishmael. And so according to tradition, Ishmael is where the Muslim faith comes from. So when we look at the long history of strife between Jewish and Christians, right? Christianity descends from Judaism. So Jewish Christian, Judeo-Christian, and Muslims, in a sense, it goes back to that, Ishmael and Isaac. And there's even when Ishmael is sent away, God does watch out for Ishmael. And there's even a prophecy that says the two will forever be in conflict. So they believe that this was renovated, updated by Ishmael. Now, we have no evidence that Abraham ever was in this area. So it feels like this kind of might have a mythology about it. But the reason being is that they're trying to establish that there is a continuity of sacredness of this particular site, trying to, tie it back to Adam, then tie it to Ishmael. But at the time that Muhammad is growing up, it was still a sacred place. It was a prime way that the city made money, but also it was very polytheistic, okay? But that's what the Kaaba is, and that's what they pray toward, and that's what they pilgrimage to. Okay, so then what happens after that is around the age of 21, it's either between 21 and 25, somewhere in there, Muhammad finally settled down, and he ends up marrying a wealthy, older widow. And he was married to her monogamously for 24 years until her death. And this was unusual for the day because, one, it was uncommon for men to marry older women, okay? But she also had been widowed, so she wasn't a virgin. This was a second marriage for her, right? But she was also established as a businesswoman. We don't know if she inherited it from her previous husband who had passed away or if she was successful in her own right, but she was quite wealthy. And so that allowed him to step away from that nomadic trading lifestyle, right? and settle down and be with her, and they had several children. Well, at the age of 40, so kind of fast forward, in 610 AD, at the age of 40, he was on a spiritual retreat. And this is the tradition, is that he was in fervent meditation and prayer, and he was in a cave, this cave, according to tradition. He was in a cave. And while he was in that cave, the angel Gabriel appeared to him and said, "Read." And Muhammad spoke out to and, he was terrified. He was, but he spoke out and said, "I can't, I'm illiterate." And then the angel said again, "Read." And so Muhammad said again, "But I can't. I'm not able to read." And for a third time, the angel said, "Read." And so he runs to his wife, who is not in the cave with him, but somewhere else, kind of set up with camp. And he's freaked out, and apparently she calms him down. And she is the one who encourages him, right, to embrace these revelations and to accept what happened to him. So it is his wife who says, "This is meaningful, this must be God speaking to you," right, and supports him. She's his first convert. Now, they say that the revelations, that's it. That's all he has. For several months, nothing. So he starts to doubt it. He starts to think, okay, that maybe I was hearing things, maybe it was my imagination, whatever. But then he started to get more revelations. So an interesting point about the Muslim faith, it is essential to their faith that he was illiterate. Okay? It's essential that he was illiterate. Because what they say is because he was illiterate, anything he wrote down had to be from God. Because he himself couldn't read and write. And they even say he wrote with his left hand. Because he was right-handed. So that is what establishes for them that Muhammad didn't write the Quran. Allah wrote the Quran. And so it's almost like they're claiming a form of like automatic writing, kind of channeling, and whatever you're channeling is using your hand to write, but you yourself aren't the one who's creating it. That's kind of the way they present it. It's almost like a claim of automatic writing. We don't know. We don't really know how it happened. If that's how it happened, if maybe instead, I did hear some scholars say that the word in the Quran that says illiterate, that recounts this story, really could have just meant uneducated, not necessarily he couldn't read and write at all, And then there's also claims that it was his wife. But that's not what Orthodox Muslims will say. They will say no, that the Quran, which Quran means recitation, that it is a recitation of Allah's actual words. He wrote it, okay? And that Muhammad was just a vessel. And for them, this is significant because they claim that the Quran is untarnished by any human interference. And from listening to them talk about their perception of the Quran and their regard for the Quran, the fact that he was illiterate and that this was literally written by Allah, okay, it's the equivalent of, for us, Jesus being born of a virgin and never having sinned. That's how they treat the Quran. Like it has to be like a virgin. Like it has to be untouched, unblemished, like no human interference or effect at all. And so for them, that's why they consider the Quran itself so sacred. Okay? They only also accept it in the Arabic. So if you see an English translation of the Quran, to them, that's not the Quran. It has to be in Arabic because otherwise, it wasn't the way that it was written by Allah. But that's also why, if you've seen on the news or on videos, how offensive it is to them to burn a Quran. Because to them, it is that sacred. Like it is divine. It is like challenging the virgin birth. It's like claiming Jesus sinned. That's the equivalent to them. That's how they regard the Quran. Okay. But what's interesting is that Muhammad, he never claimed to be miraculous. He never claimed any signs and wonders. He never claimed to be deity. He never claimed any of that. He never claimed to be special at all. He always said that the miracle was the Quran itself. And so it's very important to the Muslim faith that Muhammad not be worshipped. Only Allah is worshipped, but Muhammad not be worshipped, okay? All right, so Muhammad's family and his close friends were his first converts. And here's what's interesting. At first, he claimed that what he was teaching, what the Quran said, and what he was preaching, that his message was the same as Jews and Christians. But Orthodox Muslims will claim that he never had any exposure to Jews or Christians, and that he never saw the Torah or the Bible, even though critics of the Quran say that what it contains is basically repackaged passages from the Bible. So that's another way that they combat that criticism or that claim. They say, no, it's not that he was exposed to the Bible, that he was exposed to Jews or to Christians, and he just kind of repackaged it and presented it as new revelation because, one, he couldn't read and write, and two, he'd never encountered a Jew, a Christian, or a Bible. But if you think about his childhood, if you think about all those years trading, I don't know how accurate that is or how they could claim that. So that's a potential thing, is he probably did interact with Jews and Christians, okay? But that was at first, his claim was that he had the same message as Jews and Christians. But also, he was calling for, and I think this is the part that was borrowed from Christians, about equality for all. He spoke out against the oppression and the injustices that he saw, even in Mecca, amongst his own clan. But the clan didn't like that. They didn't like that, one, he was criticizing them, right, and how they structured things. They also did not like his message that there's only one true God, because that threatened their economy, because they relied on people of all faiths coming to the Kaaba and worshiping there. So what Muhammad was calling for was getting rid of all that and only worshiping Allah. So that's where the animosity started between the ruling clan and Muhammad and his followers, was that he was a threat to them. He was openly criticizing them, and he was threatening their power and their wealth. So it initiated a period of intense persecution. They weren't allowed to trade. Nobody was allowed to intermarry with them. It was a lot of isolation and being prevented from participating in society. Somewhere in those 2 years, both his uncle died, and his uncle was one of his protectors, and his wife died. So again, significant loss that he's experiencing. And so in this time, at some point after his wife died, here's where another tradition, it's in the Quran, but it's also elaborated on in the Hadith, which is a collection of teachings and traditions. So they say that one night he fell asleep at the Kaaba. Okay, so he was there worshiping, and he fell asleep at the Kaaba, and that he was transported. This is called the night journey, and it happened in 621 AD, and it says that he was transported. Again, it was the angel Gabriel who showed up with this mythical animal that was called a Barak, and it was kind of like a mule with wings. I know the picture's a little blurry, but it's in the middle. And you can tell it's Muhammad because he has no face. All of the pictures that Muslims will tolerate of Muhammad don't show a face, have no face, because they don't want him worshipped. And that's one of the ways they safeguard worshiping Muhammad, is if they do depict him, they put a veil over his face. So that is him in the middle with the veil over his face, riding this animal with the angels. I'm not sure which angel represents Gabriel, but that's who's supposed to be transporting him. So in this night journey, he's transported to Jerusalem. And there is debate. There are some Muslims who believe he was physically transported, that this literally happened. And then you have others who see it as a spiritual journey, that he was more like metaphysically taken, more like an astral projection type of deal. But regardless, he ends up going to Jerusalem. Now, in Jerusalem, where the Dome of the Rock is, that's apparently where they believe he landed. Okay? And in this location in Jerusalem, he met with all the prophets. He met with prophets who had come before him. Adam was there, Noah was there, Abraham, Jacob, Moses, and Jesus. And according to Muhammad, they all, including Jesus, asked him to lead them in prayer and to teach them how to actually pray. So it is this moment that instated the 5 daily prayers. So the fact that Muhammad taught 5 prophets, or however many prophets, but that's where that came from. So after he taught them how to pray, a ladder, kind of like Jacob's ladder, a ladder that he's able to climb up, and he climbs through the 7 different layers of heaven, and he makes it to the throne room of God, and he speaks to Allah face to face. And that's where he's confirmed to be God's final prophet and his representative, and that's one of the signs for Muslims about that verifies their faith is this night journey. It's very sacred to them. It's very important to them. But that's also what establishes Jerusalem as a sacred city, is this night journey. It's not that Muhammad ever actually went to Jerusalem that we know of, but it's this night journey because that's the site that he met the prophets and that he ascended on the ladder up into heaven. Okay. After this night journey is when he and his followers flee from Mecca to Medina, because there was now an open order to kill them, and especially him. They actually, the story goes that they went to his home or went to where he was staying, and there was, I don't remember how many of them, but they made a pact that all of them were going to stab him at the same time. That way, they didn't know which one would actually kill him. So then, therefore, there wouldn't be any retribution, because whoever these representatives were represented all the different subgroups within the clan. But when they got there, he wasn't there. He had already snuck out of Mecca and went to an area called Medina. And Medina is where he spends the rest of his life. So Medina is also a sacred site for the Muslim faith. And that is where he goes in 622 AD, so a year after the night journey. And that's where he builds the first mosque. So that right there is a recreation of what they believe it looked like, whatever he created. So he also lived adjacent to it. And this is where they also instituted the practice of calling to prayer from the rooftop. Have you ever seen that, like on videos and stuff? You know, they'll do a call to prayer over like a megaphone or speakers or whatever. It started here. So the 5 daily prayers were because of the night journey, and then the call to prayer from the rooftop was from this mosque. Now, in this mosque, it was a place of worship and prayer, but it was also where people could go to Muhammad, seek advice and counsel. He became an arbiter of issues, especially amongst his followers, as the numbers grew. And so that started to establish him as also a political figure. So not just a religious figure, but also a political figure of that area. Now, again, there's debate. Tradition says that he formed a treaty amongst all the different tribes that lived around Medina, and that kind of put him in power over that area, but that brought peace amongst all the tribes. There's debate over that because later, justification for attacking, that's what it looks like today. So that's why you have to look at the little remake, because they built over it. So if you were to go today, I think I heard that it can hold like 500,000 people at one time. That's how big it is. So that's the mosque in Medina today, over the site where they said Muhammad's original mosque was. Okay, so the treaty. So the treaty, the claim that there was a treaty, there's no evidence of the treaty, there's no copy of the treaty, and critics say that the idea of a treaty came later to justify the way that they ended up attacking Jewish tribes, because later they claim that the Jewish tribes broke the treaty. So there's discrepancy there. Orthodox Muslims say, no, there was a treaty, and the Jewish tribes broke the treaty, which justified Muhammad later attacking them, whereas others, including Jews of that area, said, no, there was no formal treaty. But he was growing in influence and power in the area. And this is, again, where the revelations resume. What was interesting is the revelations he had in Mecca were very much focused on an internal state of faith. And it was all about your own improvement of self, what we would call sanctification, right? Those were the revelations that he had when he was in Mecca, when they were under intense persecution, okay? But when they went to Medina and they established themselves there and have relative peace and safety there, and he becomes more of a political figure, his revelations change. And they start to take on more of a how to live. He starts dictating how certain things should be done, how life should be lived on a daily basis, okay? But his revelations also change in the fact that he claims that Allah told him that they should take revenge on those who drove them from their homes in Mecca. So they start attacking the caravans. So all those caravans that went to Mecca and moved through Mecca, Muhammad and his followers started ambushing and robbing. Okay? So that big clan that they just fled from in Mecca didn't take too kindly to this. And they sent a group, to ambush them, basically. But one of the revelations that's in the Quran that was from this period is persecution is worse than slaughter. Today, terrorists and Muslim extremists use that verse and others from this period of time to justify their attacks on people. Moderate and most Muslims condemn that because they say you have to read it in the context in which it was written, because these revelations happened during a specific period of time and don't necessarily apply forever, like it was limited to a particular time. But it is in there that persecution is worse than slaughter. And that was the revelation they used to justify ambushing and attacking these caravans, okay? This is also one of the places where the word jihad shows up. Jihad is in the Quran 35 times. Most of the time it is framed in the context of more like spiritual striving, trying to be good, trying to follow Allah, trying to be kind of holy in their behaviors. But you do have some that are associated with these revelations that do, have an element of fighting and attacks and resisting that persecution, okay? So like I said, most Muslims condemn the use of those verses for it because they said it was never meant to justify killing of innocents, but terrorists and the extremists, they claim that there are no innocents, that the people are guilty for what their government and their leaders do. So that's where you get that discrepancy, is that most Muslims condemn that, and they say, no, that's not what those verses are about, but that's where we do get the more extremist view of jihad, and where they use that to justify the attacks that they have, on America, on Israel, all around the world. Okay, but that's where that one of the debates is over: do we take these verses literally? Do they apply to this day or not? Okay, so an army was sent from Mecca to confront the attacks on the caravan. Muhammad and his followers were able to defeat them. And so Muhammad claimed that this was a sign of Allah's approval. Okay, so it's like, well, we won. Like a bigger group than us came, but we fought them off and we won. So therefore, Allah must approve of what we're doing. So they kept on doing it. Okay. But that's also the time where he received a new revelation that they should direct their prayers to the Kaaba in Mecca. They originally directed their prayers to Jerusalem. So after that night journey, they were praying toward Jerusalem. But after this defeat of the group from Mecca, he took that as a sign that Allah was approving of them pushing back and ultimately trying to take back Mecca. And so they started directing their prayers to the Kaaba in Mecca. So that also was instated at that time. So a year later, Meccans showed up with a significantly larger army. One of Muhammad's leaders deserted him with 300 men, but also one of the Jewish tribes, or not just one, all the Jewish tribes refused to fight because it was on the Sabbath. So they would have fought had it not been the Sabbath, but they weren't going to break their own, religious beliefs and practices. And so it ended up in a stalemate. And the Muslims were resentful of the fact that the Jewish tribes didn't join them to fight, and it ended up in a stalemate. So the third and final military encounter between Muhammad and his followers and the people from Mecca happened in 627 AD. Again, the people from Mecca, they showed up with a significantly larger army. According to tradition, Mecca came with 10,000 men, whereas the Muslims only had 3,000. So what happened was they got word of this group coming, and they built trenches around the city of Medina. So instead of going out to meet them and getting slaughtered, instead they hunkered down in Medina, and they built a trench, and it's called the Battle of Trenches. And they built a trench so that the Meccans couldn't reach them. And what happened was the people from Mecca ended up giving up because they ran out of resources. They had to go back home because they were running out of food, and they couldn't figure out a way to overcome this device that they had put in place. I'll just be honest. Here's something I found confusing. So the Meccans end up giving up, right? Because they can't overcome the trenches because they had fortified Medina because they ran out of resources. But again, one of the Jewish tribes, they claim, broke the treaty and was coordinating with the Meccans outside the city. So I don't know how, I couldn't understand this part of the story, how supposedly this Jewish tribe was able to overcome the trenches and go out and conspire with the people from Mecca, but yet the people from Mecca couldn't overcome the trenches and take over Medina. So I'm not quite sure about that part of the story. But what we have is an established offense from the Jewish tribes who wouldn't fight in the second battle because it was a Sabbath, and then a claim in this third one that the Jewish tribe was actually conspiring against them, broke the treaty. So according to tradition, Muhammad appointed somebody to act as a mediator, an arbiter, and he listened to both sides. And what this particular person decided was that they would slaughter all 800 Jewish men of the tribe, and that they would take all the women and children and make them slaves. So that is still one of the most controversial moments of Muhammad's life. But Orthodox Muslims say that it wasn't Muhammad who made that decision, that in his wisdom, he appointed a judge, and that judge decided. And so they don't attribute this decision to Muhammad. But again, this is sowing into the animosity between Muslims and Jews that still exists today. So that's why I point that out, okay, is there's still, because this is all happening in the Arabian Peninsula. And so they slaughtered an entire Jewish tribe. Okay. So Muhammad could not defeat Mecca militarily. So what he did was he started to form alliances with other tribes expanding beyond Medina. And one of the ways he did that was through marriage. So he was monogamous to his first wife. But in this period in his life is when he was not. He took multiple wives. Some sources say he had 9, some say he had 11, some say he had 13. So he had somewhere between 9 and 13 wives. And most of them were some sort of establishment of an alliance or an agreement or something, with another tribe. His most controversial wife was Aisha. And so in this picture, Muhammad is on the right. So again, a veil over his face. Aisha would be the one just to his right in the red. And then you would see 2 other wives, and then it's depicting a story from the Quran. But Aisha would be the one to his right. Aisha is a really important figure in Islam. But again, she's the most controversial wife, because tradition says that they were betrothed when she was 6 years old, and that they were married and the marriage was consummated when she was 9 years old. There are Muslim historians, that debate that, and they believe that she was 16 when the marriage was consummated. But there is debate over that. So if you've ever heard accusations of a child bride, or that Muhammad, was a pedophile or something like that, they're referring to Aisha, and they're referring to the tradition that she was 9 when their marriage was consummated. Now, Aisha did stay married to him until he died. And in fact, he died in her care and in her home when he did die. And she became a powerful political figure in her own right. And in fact, she is, I'll say it this way. There's debate. So some people attribute to her and a falling out that she had with Muhammad's cousin / son-in-law. So he was both. He was a cousin, and he was married to one of his daughters. So cousin / son-in-law, Ali, that there was a falling out between Aisha and Ali that is the source and the reason why we have Sunnis and Shia. So that's also kind of where Aisha shows up, is that some will claim that she's to blame for the great schism that resulted in the Sunni versus the Shia. So, all right. Let me just pause there. Questions so far? I want to say Benjamin, because I think at this time most of the tribes and the tribal identities have been lost, but I think those tribes identified with the tribe of Benjamin. Mm-hmm. Any other questions so far? Yes. I heard something like that too. Yeah. So what was something I noticed as I listened to resources, and I was listening to historians, Muslims themselves, scholars, watching documentaries. So this isn't just random stuff I saw on the internet. These were people who practice it, who teach it, who study it, in universities and all that. And what I noticed is over and over, at really important moments, Muhammad would have a revelation. So it's so something would be happening, there would be a debate, there would be an issue, there would be a problem, and all of a sudden in that moment, he would go into a trance, and he would come out and say Allah gave him a revelation, and that revelation would be whatever the solution was, right? Well, you couldn't argue with his revelations, because the sole requirement of being a Muslim is embracing and believing and following all the revelations that Muhammad said came from Allah. So things like that, about where they were allowed to do certain things at certain times, it seems like he would have this revelation that would give permission, or that would allow for certain things to happen at certain times that would otherwise contradict, right, what would be allowed in other times. So one of the things that created controversy too was, like I said, he had anywhere from 9 to 13 wives, but then he had a revelation that Muslim men could have no more than 4. So in that area, now all of a sudden there's strife because you're telling these men, which up to that point, polygamy was widely practiced and it was unfettered, and now he's putting constraints on it that he himself didn't practice. So he had upwards of 13 wives, telling other men that they could only have 4. So though that kind of revelation, where it was like, well, hold up, that violates or that contradicts, but because it's a revelation from Allah, you can't question it. You have to adapt. That's also something that I kind of perceived about the Quran, is that it's written chronologically. It starts with that first revelation, and then throughout the rest of his life, he would continue to get revelations. And it was like the revelations would adapt or change or modify, a previous one, or it would create a caveat or something, and that's where you get some extremists who will take passages that are in fact in the Quran, and they'll use that to justify things that you would hear most Muslims say, no, that's not true. That's not what we practice. And it's like, well, where are they getting it from? Because they say it's in the Quran. It is, right? But it's almost like the Quran is progressive revelation, and that you cannot take early revelation apart from the context of later revelation. And that's kind of what most moderate Muslims would say extremists do, is they're taking these earlier revelations out of context. Another thing, he had a revelation that his wives should be veiled. And one of the reasons he said was for modesty. Another reason was to quench rumors. So apparently there were rumors and there were issues happening. And so he had a revelation that the solution was for his wives to be covered and to be veiled. Now, he never said that all Muslim women needed to be veiled, but he did say that modesty was a requirement. So that's why you do see most Muslim women will have some level of modesty, like they'll wear long sleeves and long pants, but it's culturally specific whether or not they wear veils, whether or not they wear headscarves, whether or not they wear burqas, right, that full on cover everything but their eyes. That's more cultural, if not individually practiced. So you'll have individuals who will choose to extend the level of their covering beyond the modesty, or you may go to a culture or to a place where, especially if Sharia law is the law, that they will institute it. So Iran and Saudi Arabia, places like that, it's part of the law of that country, not necessarily what the Quran requires. So that's why a lot of American Muslim women will just have the long sleeves and long pants. You might see a headscarf, but it's not common here to see the full face covering and all of that, because culturally, and then of course we're not, as a country, we don't have that as a law. So, but that universal idea, or that idea of universal veiling, it actually didn't become something until 100 years after Muhammad died. So it's not part of the Quran. Okay. What else do I want to say? Oh, Sharia. Okay. So Sharia law, the basis of Sharia law is the Quran, and it is these revelations that talked about how to live life and how to do things. But what we hear called Sharia law came 200 years after Muhammad's death. And it's a combination of the teachings of Muhammad in the Quran, or the revelations in the Quran, and then the Hadith. The Hadith is a collection of writings, sayings, teachings, historical accounts, oral traditions about Muhammad. And so some of what is Sharia law, you won't find it in the Quran, but you'll find it in the Hadith, because they want to emulate the way Muhammad lived. So it may not be something that's an order from Allah, but if it was good enough for their prophet, it's good enough for them, type of a deal. And then you also had a group of scholars and leaders that 200 years after Muhammad's death, they were now having whole countries that were predominantly Muslim, and they had to find a way to govern them. And so Sharia law became almost like a Muslim constitution. So some of it is in the Quran, some of it is emulated off of the Hadith, which gives us how Muhammad lived and things he said, and some of it, it's cultural. Like they decided it, at the time. And so when you go to certain places, like Iran is a good example, Sharia law is the law. And one of the things I heard the scholars point out is anywhere Sharia law is instituted as the law of the land, things will regress back to about the equivalent of the 9th century, because that's when Sharia law was created. But it was created for people living 200 years after Muhammad, which is the 9th century. But they've never updated it, they've never changed it. And so that's why when you see places that instate the Sharia law, you see, because they take it literally and you can't update it. So, so Sharia law is not in the Quran, okay? And that's why some Muslims will say it's a good guide, but it's not applicable anymore. And I even heard some British Muslims and American Muslim scholars and historians and such say the law of the land is our Sharia. And so you'll have moderate Muslims who will say, no, the Constitution of the United States is our Sharia. Like that's our governing, laws of the land. Whereas you'll have others who are more orthodox who want to actually make Sharia replace the law of the land, if that makes sense. Okay. In 628 AD, Muhammad received a revelation that the Kaaba in Mecca is essential to their faith. Okay? So up to this point, right, they never went to the Kaaba. The Kaaba was not relevant. Well, now in 628 AD, 6 years after leaving Mecca, 1 year after having this final battle with the people from Mecca, claims that Allah speaks to him in a revelation and says the Kaaba is, in fact, essential to our faith. And in fact, we have to pilgrimage to it once a year. So they decide to head to Mecca. Well, the people from Mecca come out to meet him and said, whoa, buddy, well, what you doing? Why are you trying to come into Mecca, right? And he said, we're here in peace. We're here to worship at the Kaaba. And, they didn't want to let them in. So the story goes that they sat down and negotiated, and that they came up with a treaty. And Ali, the cousin / son-in-law, since Muhammad was illiterate, Ali is the one who could read, right, what was on there, and I get maybe even contributing parts of it, because in one place it said something like Muhammad, the messenger of God, something like that. And the Meccans didn't accept that. So they were like, no, we're not going to, you need to scratch that out and just say Muhammad, son of such and such. Because at the time, and even today, that's how they identify. They identify through their lineage, which they memorize, I don't remember how many generations back. So they were saying, no, his identifier is Muhammad, son of whatever, right? And Ali was offended and said, no, we are not scratching that out. We're not crossing it out. And according to the story, Muhammad was not willing to allow the negotiation process to be derailed. And so since he couldn't read, he asked Ali, well, point on the paper where it says the statement that they don't want. And it was pointed out, and Muhammad himself crossed it out in order for the treaty to go through. Well, his followers were insulted. They believed it was a great humiliation. They couldn't believe that he had done that he had, backed down and allowed the people from Mecca to have this victory. So it was a great humiliation. And also part of the treaty was you can't come this year. Come back next year. Okay, so the treaty didn't start for a year. So on the way back to Medina, Muhammad had a revelation. And the revelation said that wasn't a humiliation, and that they couldn't take offense at it. And in fact, it was a great victory. So then, of course, his followers had to let it go. Okay. So then they show up the next year, and they go to the Kaaba, and I wish I would have downloaded a video, because you can see a circle around the Kaaba, right? If you watch a video, they circle it. So if you watch, it's like a mass of people circling around the Kaaba, and the vast majority of them wear white, because that's supposed to kind of symbolize the equality. Like nobody comes in, dressed fancy, versus dress poor. Like everybody comes in kind of wearing just these plain white garbs, and they circle around it. So they were able to go the next year, but the year after, they wouldn't let them in. So the Meccans were breaking the treaty. So what happened was Muhammad and his followers brought an army. And when they got there, the Meccans saw not only Muhammad's army, but they also started to have people rebelling within Mecca, because the Meccans themselves said, hold up, they're coming peacefully to worship at the Kaaba, which people have been worshiping at the Kaaba since Adam built it. And so the Meccans' own people were pushing back, saying, if they're just coming in peace to worship at the Kaaba, like everybody else in the peninsula, we're not okay with you not letting them in. So basically, the Meccans at that point had to just give in and surrender. This, again, is a key moment for Muslims because it was a bloodless victory. So now what that did was it gave Muhammad control of Mecca. And rather than killing them all, which he had every right to do and which was culturally expected, he granted them all amnesty. Now, here's an interesting thing. Muhammad specifically said that in order to convert to Islam, it has to be done voluntarily. You cannot force, you cannot, so the whole convert at the edge of a sword is not in the Quran. It's opposite of what Muhammad's revelation says. But at this moment, the amnesty was, if you convert to Islam, you can stay in Mecca. If you don't, you got to leave. So he wasn't killing them, but he would have banished them. And there weren't many cities out there for them to go to. So it's almost like a technicality, right? Like they weren't forced, but they weren't given much of an option, right? Convert or leave. So it wasn't convert or die, but it was convert or leave. And after that, they cleansed the Kaaba, and they took all the pagan gods out, and they dedicated it to Allah, and that's when he instated the annual, for them an annual pilgrimage, but for the diaspora, the ones who are spread out, once in their lifetime, they're required to make a pilgrimage to the Kaaba. And that's what that is. And it's a pretty large, you can see on the left, kind of how small the people are. It's a pretty large structure, and then the space around it and there's some videos where it's full of people, and they just circle it. Okay, so by 631 AD, okay, remember he fled Mecca in 622 because they were being so persecuted. So 9 years later, within a decade, Muhammad now controlled the entire Arabian Peninsula. And he delivered his final sermon, which was wherever he told it, they had people on rooftops to relay it, because this is 631. They didn't have ways of projecting, right? So his final sermon is the final thing in the Quran, and after that he went home to Aisha, and he died in 632 AD. He left no successor, and that's where the schism comes, okay? Is you have the Sunni, who followed Abu Bakr, one of Muhammad's closest advisors, and then you have the Shia, who followed Ali, his cousin/son-in-law. So like I said, there's people who blame Aisha having a falling out with Ali and backing Abu Bakr for this schism. And Sunnis do outnumber. 90% of the world's Muslims are Sunni. So that's the biggest and most substantial branch of Islam. So today there's about 1.8 billion Muslims around the world. It is the predominant religion in the Middle East, the Horn of Africa, Northern Africa, some parts of Asia. There's also large Muslim communities in China, Russia, Western Europe, United States. Okay, I already mentioned their sacred text would be the Quran, but only in Arabic, the Hadith, which there's up to 6. So certain sects and subsects will use all of them, some of them, and then also certain subsects will include the writings of whoever their specific imam is or leader is. But all of them do agree on the Quran and at least some, if not all, of the Hadith. Okay, so let's walk through their beliefs. Okay, so their term for God is Allah. That is the one true God. And like I said, it started out as the term for the high God amongst all the polytheistic system. But that's the one that Muhammad claimed to have gotten his revelations from. And the most essential revelation is that he's one. It's a Unitarian view of God. That is essential to the Muslim faith. And according to them, Allah is all-powerful, all-knowing. He is creator, sustainer, ordainer, and judge of the universe. He is unique, inherently one, all-merciful, and omnipotent. The oneness of God, or Tawhid, is essential. It's the cornerstone of their faith. And it also means that Allah is beyond everything. So that means you cannot ascribe any human qualities to Allah. He is beyond our understanding, our comprehension. He's beyond creation. And so you can't, there's no way to depict him. There's no way to convey him in any kind of images. So there's no images of Muhammad. There's no images of Allah allowed. Okay? No images of Muhammad with his face because you're not supposed to worship Muhammad. No images of Allah because you cannot limit him. You cannot ascribe anything to him, especially a physicality, because Allah is Unitarian and transcendent. He is inaccessible. Because Allah is beyond everything, nothing can represent him. He is without place. He is without body. And it is considered shirk. Shirk means unforgivable sin. And that's where the Muslim extremists, if it's shirk, then they can kill you because it's unforgivable. It is highly offensive. It is an unforgivable distortion of Islam. So shirk, it is shirk to ascribe physical attributes to Allah. So according to the Muslim faith, it is shirk to claim that Jesus was God. So when we ascribe divinity to Jesus, when we say Jesus was God incarnate in human form, according to the Muslim faith, we are committing shirk. And that's why there's so many extremists will focus on Christians and Christian churches too, is because to them we're committing an unforgivable sin. So for them, Jesus is in the Quran. His name is Isa in Arabic, so he shows up in there as Isa. He's one of the most respected of over 124,000 prophets sent by Allah, but he is not divine. None of the prophets, not even Muhammad, is divine. They're only human and they're not to be worshipped. So this is the inside of a very large mosque. And on the left, that circle that kind of has what looks like in cursive, like an I and a W, kind of in the bottom left corner of that circle, if you can see it, that is Allah in Arabic. So if you see that, that's how it's written in Arabic. That's Allah. I don't know what the rest of it says, but that I do know says Allah. It's a monotheistic religion. They believe Allah is responsible for the creation and ordering of the universe. It is viewed as an act of prime mercy for all creatures. Allah responds to those in need or distress when they call on him. Allah guides humanity to the holy ways. Now, initially, Muhammad claimed closer ties between Allah and Yahweh. Okay, and he claimed a lot closer ties. But, and he even said, as I mentioned at the beginning, was preaching the same message as Jews and Christians. As his revelations went on, you start to see more differences. You start to see more distance being placed. So they are considered an Abrahamic faith because they descend from Ishmael, right? And they do hold to many things from the Torah, not all of the Old Testament, and certain aspects of the Torah. But like I said, as his revelations went on, you start to see more and more differences between Allah and Yahweh. So when people say that Allah is just another name for Yahweh, I and many others would argue against that. There's too many differences. If you place what the Quran says about Allah side by side with what the Bible says. First and foremost, our Bible says that Jesus is the image of Yahweh. He is Yahweh incarnate. He is the clearest presentation of Yahweh. Colossians says that Jesus is the image of the invisible God. Jesus himself said, if we've seen him, then we have seen the Father. All of that is shirk. So if that's true, then Allah cannot be Yahweh. Is that making sense? Because to us, if you've seen Jesus, you've seen Yahweh, like Jesus is God. And so if they're saying no, that can't be, well then we're believing in two different beings. Okay? Some other differences. Allah is inaccessible. Okay? You will not hear from him. You will not, you cannot access him. You cannot reach him. Yahweh wants a relationship with us. Yahweh does speak to us. Yahweh sent Jesus in order to create a way for us to be reconciled, right? So that we can have a personal relationship with him, right? He knows us. That's not the way they regard Allah. Allah is very separate and very transcendent and kind of outside of what's happening. So Yahweh's accessible, Allah is not. Yahweh wants a relationship, Allah just wants obedience. So that's why I would argue Allah and Yahweh are not the same God. We do not worship the same God. All right, afterlife. So some Muslims believe you remain in your grave until the day of judgment. Others believe that there's a thing called the trial of the grave, that when you die and you're buried, so there's no cremation in Islam. When you're dying, you're buried. So some believe that angels show up and they question you about religion, about Muhammad, and about Allah. And if you pass, then the angels comfort you and you enter some sort of kind of quasi-middle existence. And if you don't, they punish you and torment you. And what they're waiting for, and that's an image of a Muslim angel. So that's one of their depictions of an angel. So some believe everybody just stays in that kind of stasis in the grave, whereas some believe that you're comforted and you're aware if you are a Muslim, but if you don't pass, then you're tormented. And what they're all waiting for is the day of resurrection. So they do believe in a physical resurrection. That's why there's no cremation for Muslims. Okay. And the day of resurrection is when Allah brings the earth to an end. It's a bodily resurrection. And on that day, everyone who was ever created will be brought before Allah for judgment. They're going to have to give an account for every single deed they ever committed in this lifetime. So the thing to remember about Islam is scales. Okay? So this is what they picture it. They say every deed you commit is weighed and entered into a book. And so in essence, every person has a set of scales. Good deeds on one side and bad deeds on the other side. Okay? And what they're trying to do is tip the scale toward the good deeds. Because for them, there's levels of hell and there's levels of heaven. And depending upon how much your scales tip to the good, gives you a better afterlife. Okay? So they also believe that because Allah is all merciful, that he could put his finger, well, he doesn't have a finger, sorry. He could choose to tip the scales, okay, in whatever way he wants. And that his will is final. So they never have an assurance of salvation. So they do believe in repentance and forgiveness, and they say that if you beg Allah for forgiveness, he will forgive you. But on this day of resurrection, when he pulls out the scales, he could technically tip it however he wants to tip it. And so they believe that he'll tip it in the positive favor of his followers, because they believe he's all merciful. So that's what they're looking for. Now, the sins that are unforgivable, those who commit those go to hell. Okay, they also have a bridge. So believers will cross the bridge over hell and enter paradise, while unbelievers will be thrown into the pit of hell as eternal punishment. And as I said, both heaven and hell have different levels. For them, heaven is a place of never-ending delight. The Quran does describe heaven as having sensual pleasures, including sex. So this is where you get the 72 virgins, right, in paradise, that certain extremist groups will use to recruit people to martyr themselves for the faith, okay? Is they will take certain passages from the Quran that does in fact say that there are these, they're virgins, but they're not necessarily human. They're some kind of angelic being, okay, that according to the Quran are perpetually virginal. And because there's sensual pleasure in heaven, that's part of their idea, their conception of paradise. And so with the extremist groups who take certain passages literally and use that to recruit, they believe that if they are martyred for the faith, that they are guaranteed. Those scales automatically tip in their favor. And not only that, when they get there, they have 72 of these angelic creatures, perpetual virginal creatures that are there for their pleasure for eternity. Okay, so that's where that comes from. Now, there's something, what I heard was nowhere in the Quran does it say 72. That comes from some oral traditions or whatever, but the existence of these creatures, those are in the Quran. So that's where they sell that for people who are martyred. And that's what the path of jihad is. Holy war and martyrdom for the faith. And like I said, most Muslims claim that they're taking verses out of context, and that jihad is not physical fighting, it's spiritual striving. Okay, that's what most Muslims would explain. Okay, so last thing I'll touch on is the 5 pillars of Islam. Okay, so 5 pillars of Islam. 1, confess that Allah is the one true God and that Muhammad is his prophet. In order to be a convert to Islam, to become a Muslim, you have to say that. You have to make that confession of faith before 2 witnesses. That's it. That's the whole conversion process. Okay. Then you're supposed to carry out the rest of the requirements. Pray 5 times a day facing Mecca, technically facing the Kaaba. Give money to the poor, so compulsory charity. Then there's fasting during the month of Ramadan. So Ramadan is apparently the time they believe that the revelation started. So when he was in that cave and he got his first calling by the angel Gabriel, they believe that happened in the month that they celebrate called Ramadan. And then they're required, like I said, once in their lifetime to make a pilgrimage to Mecca to visit the Kaaba. Okay. Any questions about that? Beliefs? I'm going to touch real quick on the different sects and what I understand about them, but any questions about history or beliefs? Mm-hmm. It's just one of those things that they've always done. And so I think they just ascribe it to tradition, but they're praying and meditating as they go around it. Yes, Aubrey. Yeah, so the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem is the location that they believe. Again, some think it was a literal transportation. Some believe it was a spiritual journey. But in 621 AD, before they were expelled from Mecca or they left fleeing persecution, they say he fell asleep at the Kaaba and was transported to Jerusalem where he met with prophets and then ascended a ladder up to the throne room of God. Where the Dome of the Rock is in Jerusalem, they believe that's where that happened. So they believe that's a sacred place because that is where he supposedly met with the prophets and then ascended the ladder to go and speak with Allah face to face. And I guess he doesn't have a face. Speak with Allah. Sorry. Speak with Allah in the throne room. So that's what made Jerusalem a sacred place. Muhammad never, as far as we know, went there. Nothing. That's it. That night journey is the sole reason why Jerusalem has any level of sacredness to the Muslims, and that spot is supposedly where he met with the prophets and ascended to the throne room of God. And that's why it's sacred. And that's why they won't give that up. Because nothing about Islam can be changed. So, like I said, with Sharia law, where that's instituted, that's why it kind of regresses back to the 9th century, because nothing about it can be changed. Yeah. Yes. Not after him. He was the last one. Yep. And most of the prayers are just begging. Like, they're just begging, because what they don't want is on the day of resurrection, when they have to give an account, that they have any unrepented sins. And so most of the prayers are either a repetition of the confession of faith, because 5 times a day, that's what their prayer. So when they pray 5 times a day, it's rote. It's a rote, memorized thing that they say, and in it is a renunciation of what we would say, because they do not accept Christ. They do not. It's a Unitarian God, and so 5 times a day they are claiming allegiance to Allah, and they're rejecting any openness to Jesus, or technically any other faith. But the way they word it, I think that it's in there for a reason. So to isolate and to keep them away from Christianity, because that was the growing faith at the time. Yeah, Aubrey. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I guess beg for mercy, because all of this ultimately is just about those scales. And that's what's hard, is that they never have an assurance of salvation, because it's all works-based, all of it. And they're just trying to, it's their version really of karma, right? That they're just trying to do enough good to tip the scales in their favor. There is no, they do say if you beg for forgiveness, that Allah is all merciful and he'll forgive you. But if you miss any, then that's going to cause issues when you give an account, because then you have unrepented sin over on the bad side of the scale. So basically violating any of the revelations that are in the Quran. And so anything that would deny Allah, anything that would go against especially kind of the essence of Sharia, which is the expectations of how they're to live. So those revelations that he had when they went to Medina, those are the things that they have to follow. And so that's where, like, modesty, women wearing at least long sleeve, long pants, that would be one. No sex outside of marriage, that would be another. Things like that. So there's different kind of do's and don'ts for daily living that would be considered good deeds, bad deeds. So now some of them are, if it's shirk especially, there's a disgrace that comes that, again, some cultures will take things literally, and that's where you'll have like fathers or brothers will kill, so if I'm trying to think of what the term is, but it's happened a few times in the United States, right, where a girl gets caught having sex outside of marriage, and either the father or the brother, in order to restore the reputation of the family, kill her, so those sorts of things. But that's a very narrow reading and understanding of the Quran, which most Muslims would say you're taking out of context, because it's a progressive revelation. You can't just follow the early revelations without considering the context of the later revelations. So that's where it gets hard, is you have these, and really kind of sects are like denominations where it keeps breaking smaller and smaller, and depending upon who you're listening to, they could take things very literally, and take things in isolation, take things, how they would say out of context. So it really just kind of depends on who you're following. So with the Sunnis, like I said, the Sunnis, 90% of the world's Muslim population is Sunni. In this image, you can see the green is Sunni. So this is, the darker the green, the higher the density of Sunni Muslims in that area. And then the red would be Shia. And so you can see Iran is the predominant place where Shia are. You have some Shia in Iraq as well, but Iran is the one place where the government, it is a Muslim government, but it's specifically a Shia controlled government. So for Sunnis, like I said, they followed Abu Bakr after Muhammad's death, and the first four caliphs or successors were all close advisors of Muhammad. They see themselves as the guardians of Islamic tradition. They believe that both individuals and communities should be guided by Sharia law. They follow the Quran, the Hadith, and also consensus. That's what's unique about Sunnis from Shia. Sunnis believe in consensus, and what that means is the cultural aspect. What does the majority of the community of a certain area, what's the consensus? And that is a major factor as well. So that's why some areas you'll see more, literal practices. One example is female genital mutilation. That is cultural. And so if you go to, say, Somalia, it is practiced there. But if you go to Saudi Arabia, it's not. So that's one where it will be considered an issue of consensus, not necessarily something that is mandated by the Quran. Okay? If you've not read the autobiography of Ayaan Hirsi Ali, it's a very powerful story. And she was born in Somalia, then went to Saudi Arabia, then ended up in Ethiopia, and then her father married her off to a man in Canada. She had a layover in the Netherlands on her way to being sent to Canada to marry this man she'd never met. She gets off the plane, claims, refugee status, and stays. And so she gets out of the marriage, because she just doesn't go. She stays in the Netherlands. She ends up rising up and becomes one of their elected political leaders in the Netherlands. So she has quite an amazing story. She's in the United States now, but one of her things is she advocates against the practice of female genital mutilation in her story, she says how it was a common thing in Somalia, but not in other places. There is a very large Muslim population in Minnesota, and there are groups of Muslim communities who are practicing that in the United States. And that's one of the things that she advocates, is for stricter laws and more education and things like that. So she's one of the people trying to bring reform to Islam, not to all of Islam, to more of those subgroups, right? Those kind of smaller ones that are using consensus as a way to validate practices that we would consider extreme or barbaric or, harmful at least. Okay, within Sunni, there's 4 major schools of thought. So that means you take the Sunnis and you break them down into 4 denominations. So you got 2, and then, almost like Protestant and Catholic, right? And then you break them down even more. That's kind of what starts to happen. So you got 4 major schools of thought. Forgive me, my pronunciation is not going to be right. Hanafi is the oldest and most liberal school, and that's the one that you'll find in Iraq, and they use reason for legal opinions. So less so consensus as far as populace, instead kind of their scholars. They rely on more their scholars to make decisions. Maliki was founded in the 8th century. Shafi was branched from Maliki in the 9th century. That subgroup rejects consensus, and instead they rely on the writings of their own founder. And then the last one, Hanbali, is the smallest of the 4 schools. Okay, technically there's a 5th. Wahhabism, that was established in the 18th century, the late 1700s. That's the type of Sunnism that the Saudi royal family practices in Saudi Arabia. So the 9/11 bombers were Wahhabi. So now, there are extremists in both Sunni and in Shia. It really depends on, when you get down to it, which of these groups are they following, but then even within them, who's teaching them. Now, the term imam is Shia. You won't see imam in Sunni, but it's the same idea. Like, who's their teacher? Who's the one they're following? So Shia, or Shiite, they followed Ali after Muhammad's death. And Ayatollah, you guys have heard Ayatollah, right? That's a Shiite term, and it's a title for someone who is deemed a judge of religious or spiritual matters. So that's Ayatollah. This is also the sect that has imams, and they believe the imams all descended from Muhammad and therefore had kind of this divine right to interpret. So they could not add to the Quran, but because they descended through Ali, who was Muhammad's son-in-law, because they descended from them, they claimed like this hereditary ability and right to be the only ones to interpret what does this actually mean and how do we live it out. So they venerate their imams like saints, and they believe that the imams are pure by nature and that their authority is unquestionable. Now, within Shia, you have two major subgroups. The Twelvers is the largest branch of Shia. It's the majority sect in Iran, and only descendants of Muhammad can be imams. This is the group that says 12 divinely ordained imams. So they're Twelvers. One of the 12, the youngest one, disappeared. And they kind of wait for him like a Messiah. So they believe this kind of missing imam, one of the 12, will return and is kind of a messianic figure in some ways. You also have the Ismaili, which is similar, but they follow a different imam. And then there's also another group, and there's, like I said, it keeps branching and branching and branching. So the other group I wanted to identify was the Sufis. Okay? So if you've ever seen that, I don't know if any of you have ever seen the twirling. Okay, these are Sufis. Sufis can be Sunni or Shia, because what Sufis are the mystical ones. They're the ones who want to replicate the mystical encounters that Muhammad had with Allah. So they induce these trance-like altered states. They engage in heavy meditation, and that's why they twirl. They're twirling like that in order to induce this state of altered consciousness where they're trying to replicate the experiences that Allah had. Not necessarily that Muhammad had. Not necessarily thinking that they'll get revelations like Allah did, but instead they're just trying to be more like Muhammad, including this intense meditation and prayer, and they're known for their twirling. So that's the Sufis. But they're the ones that are more spiritual, metaphysical of all the Muslims. Most of the others are just very legalistic, depending upon their interpretation of the Quran, and just getting those scales to tip in their favor. Okay. Any other questions about Islam? That's everything I have. Real basic introduction, but I think it covers the essential beliefs, practices, that sort of thing. Okay, so we're going to now move on to Sikhism, okay? And it is a syncretic faith that blends Hinduism and Islam. Okay, so if you were here when I taught on Hinduism, some of the beliefs should sound familiar because that's what the founder did. He took parts of Hinduism and he blended it with parts of Islam because the whole purpose was to reconcile those two religions. Because where he grew up, which is now modern-day Pakistan, where he grew up, there was so much fighting between the Hindus of India and the Muslims of Pakistan, and he grew up in Punjab, which is on the border, of those two, and he just saw all the fighting. And he wanted to find a way to overcome that fighting and bring peace. So his proposal was, well, let's just blend the two religions. If we blend them, then both can be happy, and then we can all live in peace. Okay? That didn't happen. Instead, it created a new religion that is growing, but you still have Muslim, you still have Hindu. But when we walk through the beliefs, just know that was the goal, was to blend the two. So the term Sikh means learner. That's where Sikhism comes from, but it is a syncretic faith. And it was founded around 1500 AD, so only about 500 years old. It's a relatively new faith. Okay, so the person who established it was Guru Nanak, and that's a depiction of him, Guru Nanak. He was raised a Hindu. He became disillusioned of Hindu rituals. He also became a musician, and he befriended a Muslim, and the two of them started doing these music festivals, and he kept trying to bring everybody together. The two of them wanted to show you can be Hindu, you can be Muslim, you can be friends, you can play music together. Let's all just, come together, right? And they would come to the music festival, but it wasn't having the effect he was hoping, which was bringing peace and helping them overcome their divisions. So he claimed that one day he was taking a bath in a river and that he received a revelation. And the revelation is, there is no Hindu, there is no Muslim. So that's the revelation he got. There is no Hindu, there is no Muslim. And from that, he claimed all gods of all faiths are merely manifestations of the one God Spirit. Okay? So he believes all gods of all faiths are true, but they're just emanations, manifestations, avatars, if you will, which is Hindu, right? A Hindu idea of the one true God Spirit. So he tries to, bring the Islam in by saying there is one God, but then he tries to bring the Hinduism in by saying all these others are emanations and manifestations of the one God. And so he tried to use that as the basis for bringing everybody together. He rejected all dietary restrictions, all icons, statues, and liturgy, no pilgrimages, no rituals, no fasting of any kind. Now, after Nanak, there were 9 other human gurus, and those are the ones kind of around the edge. And they helped to continue to develop the faith. It was the 5th guru, Guru Arjan, who compiled the first authorized book of Sikh scripture, the Adi Granth. And that's also the same time that persecution began, and he was the first martyr executed for the Sikh faith, and that happened in 1606. Then it was the 10th guru, Guru Gobind, who was the last human guru. And he established the rite of initiation. So if you wanted to become a Sikh, the ritual, he established that. And then also what they're kind of known for are the 5 Ks, or the 5 articles of faith. The 10th guru was the one who established those. He also provided the final version of the Adi Granth, because what he said was he was the final human guru, and that their scripture was now going to be forever the living guru. So the Adi Granth, which is their scriptures, is also referred to as a guru. So they treat a copy of their scriptures like it's divine, like it's because they regard it as a guru. So they got 10 human gurus, and then the Adi Granth is the everlasting guru. And similar to how Muslims regard the Quran, that's how Sikhs regard their scriptures as well, that the printed scripture is itself divine. Now, after the gurus, you had military leaders. And the military leaders were working to establish Punjab as an independent state, because there was a lot of fighting and political kind of back and forth in that area. And that continued until the British invaded the area and occupied that area. Okay. In 1845, British troops came in and took over the region. The Sikhs developed a good relationship with the British and even served with great distinction in the British Army. So that's one of the illustrations of the time that you can see Sikhs being a part of the British Army. That lasted until 1919, when there was a massacre of Sikhs by a British general. So they were starting to, in 1919, they were starting to protest British occupation. They wanted their independence. And this British general just opened fire and massacred many Sikhs. So that ended the cordial relationship between the Sikhs and the Brits. So when India finally received its independence in 1947, the Sikhs had to choose. Do you want to be a part of India, or do you want to be a part of Pakistan? Because Punjab is on the border. Okay? They chose India. So they are Punjab is, the majority of Punjab is Sikh, and they're right on the border, but they are part of India. Okay? And they continue to, as far as I understand, try to work in political ways, not violent ways, but to get independence. They want to be their own state. There are approximately 30 million Sikhs in the world, most of them living in Punjab. There's about 500,000 estimated Sikhs in the United States, 100,000 of those living in California. There is a growing population of Sikhs in Mississippi. And because of this growing population of Sikhs, when they updated the public school social science academic curriculum and standards, they actually now have a required module on Sikhism. So just like we in public schools, they have to learn about Islam, well, now they've changed it and they've added a module on Sikhs. And there's a growing population. So if you see men in turbans, they're Sikh. They're not Muslim. There's a Sikh temple right on the 20, right? And I live in Madison. There's a number of Sikh families now in my neighborhood. I see them walking, at night and things. So when you see the turban, assume they're Sikh, because most of the time they are. All right, so like I said, the primary source of scripture is that Adi Granth, which they refer to as a guru. So Guru Granth Sahib. It's a compilation of writings of the first 5 gurus, as well as traditions and teachings of the saints. It is considered a manifestation of spiritual substance, and it is revered as if it were God. It's divine. Now, their one God spirit, is Waheguru, and they believe he has millions of emanations, and he is the same for all people and all religions. So that's kind of what that is supposed to show. They believe all gods. Okay, all religions, everything comes from this one God spirit called Waheguru. Okay, so now Waheguru is a creator, but he's also inseparable from creation. So this is a pantheistic faith. So this one God spirit is in everything. That also comes from the Hindu side. Okay, so the fact that there's one is from Islam. The fact that there's millions of emanations and it's in creation, that comes from the Hindu side. Guru Nanak says there's no need to fight over which God is correct because they're all the same. So his whole purpose was peace, right? There's no need to fight over any of it because according to him, it all comes from this one God spirit. The one God spirit is unknowable. It's not rational. It's not personal. It's basically an all-pervading spirit. It's in everything. And you approach it through meditation. In the afterlife, they also borrow from Hinduism, and it's a type of reincarnation. They call it a continuous transmigration of the soul. So they borrow that from Hinduism as well. Now, your position in the next life is dependent upon your faithfulness in this life. And so basically, it's kind of a type of karma, which does come from Hinduism, but I think the way they picture it is more like the scales, which come from Islam. So, because the reason why I say I think they have more of a picture of the Muslim scales is because they believe that the one God spirit, the Waheguru, that modifies it and can tip the scales because they believe that every person has the potential. It's possible for them to do good and be good. So however you live, however many bad things or good things you did, determines your position in the next phase of the transmigration of your soul. However, everybody who's born has the potential to do good, and they believe that is because of the influence of that one God spirit. So you see how, I'm hoping you're tracking with the blend, right? You're seeing the blend? Okay. Let's see. So salvation is through enlightenment and liberation from the effects, so that the transmigration ceases and that they merge with the divine. So again, borrowing from Hinduism. Okay, so the practice of Sikhism is all based on worship. And again, similar, if you remember the Hindu one, it was all 5 of this and 8 of this and 6 of this. Sikhism is kind of similar in the fact that I'm going to go through things that have different numbers. The first one is 5. Okay, the 5 evils that block worship, you'll also hear them referred to as the 5 thieves because it's robbing your worship. It's impeding that. And so they believe that this is all caused ultimately by ego. So that's the first one, ego or pride. That's what's blocking you from realizing your connection to the divine and, keeping you from being able to worship. So these are the 5 evils: ego or pride, anger, greed, envy or attachment, and lust. So that's what's in our way from being able to meditate and connect with the one God Spirit. So how do we overcome these? Well, there's 8 steps. So that's the next slide, is the 8 steps in order to overcome them. So first, full equality. It is immoral to show any distinction or rank based on race, class, or gender. So this is also one of the first religions that pushed that equality and allowed women to have full access to everything that the men were able to do, because they believe that a sense of equality is one of the ways you overcome greed and envy and lust and anger and all that. Meditating on the scripture, their Adi Granth. The conversion ceremony. So the conversion ceremony, it includes a baptism that symbolizes a spiritual rebirth. Taking a new name. So not all of them do this, but part of that baptism, you can take on a new name. And that represents that you're kind of leaving your worldly family behind and kind of stepping into like this spiritual family. And so typically with men, they take on the name Singh, S-I-N-G-H, or some form of that. So if you meet a man that has that last name, there's a high chance he's Sikh or comes from a Sikh family, because they take that on. For women, the word is Kaur. So Kaur is the one that they take on. So it'll come on like either a middle name or a last name, basically, is what they do. And they do that at conversion. They adopt the 5 articles of faith, or the 5 Ks, which we'll go through in a minute. They commit to the 3 duties of the faith, which we'll go through in a minute. They adopt their dress code, and they follow the teachings of their sacred text. The Guru Granth Sahib, or the Adi Granth, they commit to following everything that's in it. So according to them, if you do these 8 things, it helps you overcome the 5 evils that is blocking you from worship. So this is basically, if you do this, it's like the 8-fold noble path of Hinduism. If you do this, it helps you position you so that you end up either closer to that liberation or in a better position for your next round of the transmigration of the soul. So this is kind of their version of that 8-fold noble path. If you do these things, it helps you overcome all those evils that's blocking your worship. And basically, you get over yourself. Their big thing is just ego. So if you do these things, it's supposed to help you overcome your evil or your ego, so that you can then connect with that one God Spirit. Okay. All right, then we have the 3 duties. Okay, the 3 duties of the faith, or principles, or pillars. Depends on who you listen to, what term they use, but this is what they commit to in order to get rid of their ego and reach liberation. So this is part of those 8 steps. One is work hard and honestly. So that is big for them, that they are hard workers, they have a good work ethic, that they want to earn their living in an honest way. So if you want to hire a Sikh, you're probably in a good position to be hiring somebody who will work hard and who will work honestly, because it is an essential part of their faith and their life. The second one, share what you have with the needy. This includes giving free food. So a big part of their time together is communal meals, and also selfless service. So they try to be very generous with their resources as well as their time. And the last one, always remember God, or the way guru, throughout the day. And this is through meditation and prayer. And this is a true, genuine reflection. Like, they are expected to keep that one God Spirit in the forefront of their mind throughout the day. So they're meditating, praying, genuinely reflecting throughout the day on their sense of God. All right, let me pause there. Questions? I'm spending less time on this one just because we've already talked about Hinduism, just talked about Islam. So hopefully you're seeing it's just a mixing pot. Yeah. It's very similar to kind of the Muslim as far as modesty for women, but you will see an influence of the Indian. So if you've seen the way that women wear saris, you'll see a lot of Sikh women wear saris, but they do embrace that modesty. I see Sikh women walking around my neighborhood just wearing regular jeans and shirts. I mean, it's about modesty, but it's not as strict as, we would expect, say, like Islam. Sikh men, they'll wear regular clothes like you would see any, typical man wear, but then they'll wear their turban. So a turban is required for for Sikh men. And that was something that was instituted, I think, by that 10th guru, because there was a lot of persecution happening. And there were some who were killed, and there were some who ran off. And the ones who ran off were able to run off because they blended into the crowd and nobody could tell they were Sikh. So the guru said, no, you're not allowed to do that. So all the men are going to wear turbans so that you're identifiable. Yeah. And what was interesting is the story, and again, it's tradition. I don't know how true this account is, but they said that the way he instituted the turban was that he called everybody forward, so everybody came together, and he had a tent, and he called for a human sacrifice. He said, I want somebody to volunteer to sacrifice themselves. And so somebody came forward, a man came forward, and he took him into the tent, and he comes out, and he has a bloody knife. And he goes, all right, I need another one. So somebody else comes up. He takes him inside, then, comes out, still with the bloody knife. He ends up with 5 volunteers. And then he goes inside, and he didn't actually kill them, but because they were willing to die, they were elevated. I don't think they were made gurus, but whatever kind of right below a guru would be. And they came out, and they were all wearing turbans. And so from then on, basically, if you wore a turban, then that meant you were willing to die for your faith. You were willing to be identified as a Sikh, which meant in that time and in that place, you could be martyred. So that's how he instituted the turbans, is if you're going to be a Sikh, then you're all in. You got to be willing to be known as it and die for it. So that was the story that was told about where the turbans came from, is a way to identify Sikh men. Okay, the 5 articles of faith, or the 5 Ks. This is how you know, like I said, besides the turban, because the turban isn't one of the 5 Ks. It's part of the dress code, but it's not one of the 5 Ks. But uncut hair. So kes is the uncut hair. That's the first one. They see hair as a gift from God. Keeping your hair in its natural state is symbolic of living in harmony with the will of God. It's symbolic of brotherhood and has become a symbol of the Sikh faith itself. They want to live as God made them. So they never cut their hair. And like I said, it was that 10th and final human guru who instructed Sikh men to wear a turban to protect their hair, but to also promote that social identity. Okay? So I knew a lot more Sikhs when I lived in Arizona. And when the boys are young, you'll see them and they'll be growing out their hair and they'll keep it in like a little bun. And they usually don't wear a turban as children, but instead you'll see they have it pinned up in like what we would call a man bun on the top of their head. And then when they become adults is when they actually will start wearing like a turban, Now the size and the grandiosity is up to each person. Most of the ones I've seen are pretty demure, like it's not extravagant, but inside the turban is their hair in a bun. But it's held together, so it's a bun, and it's held together with the second, which is the karga, which is the comb. So twice a day, they're supposed to take their hair down, use this little wooden comb out their hair, put it back in the bun, and then hold it in the bun form with the comb and put their turban back on. So it's about keeping themselves clean and tidy. So they have a comb, but if they're wearing their turban, you won't see it because it's what's holding their hair in that position. Then you have the kara, which is a steel bracelet, and it's worn on the right wrist to remind them of the vows that they've taken and to symbolize restraint from doing evil. So basically, it's meant to make them think twice before they do something with their hands, right? So most of them are going to be right-handed, so they wear it on the right hand so that if I'm about to do evil or do harm, that bracelet's supposed to make them think twice. Okay, so if you see both man and woman, they'll wear a silver bracelet on their right hand. You will also see, or you might see, this is one of those where a sword. Now, back in the day, they would actually strap a sword and they would walk around with the sword, and it's called a kirpan, and it's to symbolize courage and self-defense. Because during the time of persecution, they were allowed self-defense. They were never supposed to use their sword as an offensive weapon. It was always to defend themselves and the innocent. But now, and especially in like places like America where they don't need a sword to defend themselves, they're not at risk in that regard. So instead, they wear or carry a symbolic one, and usually it's just a few inches. So it'll be like a little one, but it's still meant to satisfy this requirement and be symbolic. After 9/11, when TSA instituted all its rules and such, this was an issue because you're not allowed to travel, but it's part of their religion, and so they had to kind of work out some kind of ability to fly while still having that their kirpan. So, and then the last one is the kakahira. There we go. This is part of the dress code too, and it's basically this undergarment. And the undergarment is supposed to be a reminder of restraining passion and lust. So it's kind of like a purity garment. And so that's the fifth of the Ks. So the ones you would see, you'll see the long hair, either on a woman or in a turban for a man. You'll see the bracelet. You might see the mini little kirpan, depending upon where they keep it. Okay, but all Sikhs will have these 5 things. Okay, then we have the 4 commandments, which are basically really prohibitions of behaviors. Do not dishonor the Creator's intention by cutting your hair. Do not harm the body with tobacco or other intoxicants. Do not eat sacrificial meat, so meat that's been sacrificed to gods or what have you. Don't eat that, and don't commit adultery. And the bird is like symbolic of one of the gurus. I can't remember which one, but that's why all these pictures, well, not all of them. Certain ones have birds. The birds are symbolic. Has meaning to them. They also continue to do the 5 daily prayers like Muslims do. They do 3 in the morning, 1 in the evening, and 1 at bedtime, but they don't do it where they direct it in a direction and that kind of thing, but they do have 5 prayers, so they kept that part of Islam. And then they do communal activities. They worship together, they cook and eat together, and they serve each other. So that's supposed to carry out and satisfy a lot of their religious requirements. So this is the Sikh temple that's on the 20. And the pictures on either side are what it looks like inside. So if I've never gone inside. I don't have a reason to go inside, but that's what it looks like. And you can see there's no chairs. So instead but they do, like I said, a lot of communal stuff, communal meals. And in Punjab, they have this huge free kitchen where they serve 100,000 people a day. Yeah, in this free kitchen. And it's all vegetarian. Not because they're required to be vegetarian, but because they're just trying to make it accessible to everybody. Because so many are raised Hindu and will either convert or they're trying to honor. Like I said, it's a blending, right? Most Hindus are vegetarian, so you'll see some who still maintain that even though it's not required. So what I would say about Sikhs, they're going to be kind people. They're going to be hardworking people. They're not going to try to convert you because they don't need to, because just kind of like Hindus, they don't try to convert you either, because to them it's just like, well, maybe next time around, like you'll end up in a higher status, and maybe you might be lucky enough to be born to a Sikh family, because with that idea of that transmigration, they don't have a need to convert. Whereas, like Islam, they do. They have a heaven and hell, and only one lifetime like Judaism and Christianity. But with Sikhs, they're just going to be friendly, kind people. They're not going to try to convert you. They're not going to try to force anything on you. So if you encounter them, because like I said, there's a growing Sikh community in Mississippi. There's no need to be intimidated or scared or anything. Like they're going to be kind people. If you were to try to witness to them, what I would say is be ready for them to say, "Oh, sure, Jesus is one of the emanations of because according to them, oh yeah, it's all true, it's all real, it's all the same. We believe in the same God. You call him Jesus, I call him something else, but they're kind of a all roads lead to God type of a thing. You kind of have to be ready for that because they are. But one way you can always address and witness to any of these faiths is grace. Because all of them are works-based. All of them. And so bringing grace, telling them that God actually loves them, that God is personal. No other faith has that. A personal God who talks to you, who wants to know you, who wants you to know him, right? No other faith has grace. So if you're going to try to have conversations, that's where I would focus on. Is kind of addressing more the works-based piece, because that's where you're gonna intrigue them. It's going to be a different message, because one of the things, just like with Hinduism, if you tell them about Jesus, oh sure, I'll just add him to my pantheon of all these different, to them they don't have a pantheon, but they'll just sit there and go, oh sure, you say Jesus, I say something else, and they'll have a conversation with you as if we're still talking about the same God. But we're not, So you have to kind of be mindful of how, they're kind of regarding what you're saying. And, so that if you're trying to give a witness, telling your testimony, talk about God intervening in your life. This faith doesn't have that. Because to them, God is not personal, not rational. It's just a spirit. It's just an energy, that permeates things. So if you were to actually talk about God, Jesus, doing something in your life, that would be a completely new reality for them. So that's what I would say, is if you have opportunities to do so, don't be scared. They're going to be very friendly, very kind, much more open. Whereas with a Muslim, you'd have to take a different strategy, because they're not even going to want to listen to you talk about Jesus, because Jesus means shirk, and shirk means excommunication or death. So you got to go a different route with Muslims. But with Sikhs, you can probably go a little bit more direct. They're not going to be as scared of the name of Jesus. All right, well, thank you for coming tonight, but also for those who kind of been tracking with the series. And it's been, it's been fun for me to be able to put this together for you guys. And I've taught this before, but I've always taught it in like a university setting where I had to stay very middle of the road. So it was really a pleasure to be able to talk openly and to speak of how does this compare to Christianity? How do we take this information to help us effectively witness if and when we have the opportunity to speak to people who come from these faith backgrounds, who practice these faith backgrounds, just helping you see. I'm hoping what it does is it takes some of the mystery out, and therefore it takes the fear out, because, and keep these papers, keep them, because if I encounter somebody, I don't remember all these details. I kind of remember the general sense of the different faiths, but there's times where I'll still flip it open and be like, oh, that's right. They're the religion that, okay, got that, So if you encounter somebody, a new neighbor, a new coworker, something like that, you have at least the basics, so then what they mean and how you can just speak with them, and how you can just, share your faith, and if possible, give your testimony and witness to them about the truth, because that's what's missing from all of these. They're missing Jesus. They're missing the truth. They're missing grace. And that's what we need, right? And that's what they need. So I'm hoping that by having this information, you feel a little bit better prepared, but really just taking that fear out of it, and giving you a sense of how to approach them and what their terminology means, just kind of what they're thinking and believing, so you know how to be respectful, right? Even as we witness. So thank you for being here.